You see his instincts are wrong. And his self-adulation is manic, euphoric, self-adulation. This is the mentality of the worst kind of dictator. Look, the miracle man, I said before, and I can say it again, he has a Nero problem. He's a contemporary Nero. Famous kind of problem. And if you leave him in there, you're going to find out the effect he's going to play. He's going to play the role of a Nero.
So who is this Nero character? Throughout history, there have been many kings, queens, emperors, and tyrants. But Nero alone stands out as a unique prototype for some of the worst despots in world history. Marked by pathological narcissism, a personality disorder built into his character from before he became emperor, he was as a series of bombs, each bigger than the previous, just waiting to be detonated. As his narcissism was fed, the bombs were successively set off, each unleashing a new phase of terror and destruction magnitudes above the first. At the age of 3, Nero lost his father to death and his mother, Agrippina, to banishment. He lived with his aunt and was put under the care of 2 tutors, a dancing master and a barber. Before reaching puberty, Nero acted in a Trojan play and got his first taste of the applause of adoring fans. When his uncle, Emperor Claudius, recalled his mother from exile, a power-hungry mother and an estranged son were reunited. At age 11, after the death of his stepfather, Nero was adopted as a son by Emperor Claudius and placed under the tuition of Seneca. At age 17, Nero himself became emperor. In the beginning, Nero's killer mentality was held in check. Instead, he showed a certain generosity and clemency towards the people. He decreased taxes, distributed money to the people. To the noblest senators, he gave annual monetary allowances, and to his Praetorian Guard, he gave allowances of grain. While his seeming clemency towards the people always remained, his vices of nature became more and more unchecked. The more semblance of power he gained, the more unchecked his vices would become. And any person that stood in the way or posed a threat, not a real threat, but a threat to Nero's fantasy, were removed. His mother had every intention of controlling Rome herself through Nero. Her passion and ambition and control posed a serious point of contention for Nero. Does he listen to his advisors Seneca and Burrus? Or does he do what his mother tells him? He eventually determined to yield to no authority but that of Seneca. His mother, in a raged reaction, declared that Nero's stepbrother, Britannicus, was now of full age and could replace Nero. What was Nero's response? Poison. He poisoned Britannicus in public at a banquet, and as Britannicus convulsed, Nero told his guests that his brother was simply experiencing the effects of periodical epilepsy, and that his sight and senses would gradually return. Only in the 3rd year of his reign did Nero begin to throw off the mask. The man he dreaded most was Cornelius Sylla, a dull and sluggish man, but Nero mistook his stupidity for profound thinking and the deep reserve of a dangerous politician. Graptus, to win Nero's favor and who knew of Nero's dread of Sylla, framed an artful story of an attack against Nero's life. One night, when Nero was reveling outside the limits of Rome, Graptus told Nero that a conspiracy had been formed against his life and that villains lay in ambush. By taking a different route back to Rome, the ambush was avoided and Nero saved. Graptus named the author of the plot as Sylla, and Sylla was exiled from Rome. As Nero's vices took control of him, his generosity to the people still remained. The complaints of the people against the oppression practiced by the collectors of revenue were so loud and violent that Nero was inclined to abolish the whole system of duties and taxes, thereby to serve the interests of humanity and bestow on mankind the greatest blessing in his power. During this time, Nero had decided that he wanted to divorce his wife Octavia, his stepsister, and instead marry his concubine, a very dominant woman called Poppaea. Nero's mother raged against Poppaea's dominance, and in desperation to be the #1 ruler of Nero, she successfully wooed her son into bed. Still, Nero wanted Poppaea as wife, and he struggled to overcome his mother's dominant opposition. He distanced himself from her, but grew more and more detested at her existence, and so determined to have her dispatched. But would it be poison or poignard? Anicetus, a tutor from Nero's youth, came to his rescue and devised a plan. Nero's mother was to travel in a boat that was fixed to have the leaden roof fall in once the boat was at sea. But when the roof fell, it killed an attendant, and his mother escaped and swam to shore. Nero, awaiting the news of his mother's death, instead got word that she was safe and recovering from the accident. With fear and paranoia that his mother might seek revenge, that she might carry her complaints to the ear of the Senate, or incite the army against him and stir up rebellion, he demanded that assassins be dispatched. Seneca and Burrus, seeing the state of dismay that Nero had fallen into, did not dissuade him. They saw that either the mother must fall, or Nero perish. The population was indignant towards Nero for the murder of his mother, so he fled Rome in fear and sent letters to the Senate attempting to justify the murder. He loitered in the towns of Campania, full of doubt and perplexity, unable to determine how he should re-enter Rome. Would the Senate receive him with a submissive and complying spirit? Could he rely on the temper of the people? His advisors sought to animate his spirit by assuring Nero that the name of his mother was detested, and that since her death, the affections of the people for the person of the emperor held no bounds. He had only to show himself, and it would be seen that he reigned in the hearts of the multitude. With this, they convinced him to re-enter Rome. Crowds of people had been established to line the streets through which Nero would pass. Rows of scaffolding had been built up, and an amphitheater of spectators as if a triumph were to enter the city. Nero was revived with adulation and given a new spirit to consolidate his power and further unleash his violence. In 60 AD, a comet appeared, which superstitions of the times held as the announcement that governments were to be changed and kings dethroned. The name of rebellious Plautus was resounded in every corner as Nero's replacement. Fearing overthrow, Nero sent a letter to Plautus demanding that he and his family remove themselves immediately from Rome. While Nero is seeking stardom, wars are raging and his Roman soldiers are demolishing cities and violently killing their opponents. In Armenia, caves that people were hiding in were covered with brush and set alight. In Britain, there was a massacre of 80,000 men, women, and children. At the same time, Nero was diminishing the Senate's power and making the rules for himself. Burrus had died a questionable death, and Seneca's character had been blackened by opponents to the point that Nero's paranoia that Seneca might be plotting against him had caused him to reject Seneca's advice and remove him from any influence. Anyone who opposed Nero in any way was now threatened with removal, and senators and advisors that wished to keep on Nero's good side gave him constant flattery that only fed his violence. Antistius, a praetor of Rome, was banished for being the author of sarcastic verses against the emperor. Fabricius Viento, who in a book spoke ill of the Senate, was ordered into exile. Plautus and Sylla, both whom Nero had already exiled, were deemed potential threats from their distant provinces, so assassins were dispatched against both. Their heads were conveyed to Rome, and as Nero amused himself with the sight of them, he declared, "Nero, now you may safely marry Poppaea." Octavia was divorced and Poppaea married. She was ordered into exile and then, several days later, commanded to end her days. Doryphorus, the most considerable of Nero's freedmen, was poisoned for opposing the marriage to Poppaea, and Pallas, murdered for his riches. But as often as banishment or bloody execution was ordered, the Senate never failed to thank the gods for their bounty. Next, Nero decided that he wanted to build a new Rome. So the city was set ablaze with fire while Nero went to his own theater and there, mounting the stage, sung the destruction of Troy as a happy allusion to the present misfortune. Word spread rapidly that Nero was responsible for the fire, and the masses, who were already growing weary of Nero, were angry. To relieve himself of the blame, Nero determined to transfer the guilt to others. For this purpose, he punished with exquisite torture the Christians. A set of abandoned wretches were found and induced to confess themselves guilty, and on their evidence, a large number of Christians were convicted. Some were covered with skins of wild beasts and left to be devoured by dogs. Others were nailed to the cross. Numbers were burnt alive, and many, covered with inflammable matter, were lighted up when the day declined to serve as torches during the night. These Christians fell a sacrifice not for the public good, but to glut the rage and cruelty of one man only. By 65 AD, many in position of power had finally come to the conclusion that Nero should be removed, and a deep conspiracy began to form. Senators, Roman knights, military men, and even women incited their zeal for Gaius Piso to replace Nero. But the conspiracy was uncovered before it could be fulfilled. Members of the conspiracy pled with Piso, the senator who was to replace Nero, to lead them into action immediately before Nero responded. But instead, Piso retired to his house and fortified his mind against the worst that could happen. When soldiers broke in on him, he ordered his servants to open his veins and expired. One by one, the conspirators, or the people Nero convinced himself were the conspirators, were put to death. Seneca, Nero's mentor from youth, a number one advisor for 8 years, and against whom there was no evidence of any involvement in the plot, was targeted. After a guard reported to Nero on Seneca's response to questioning of his involvement, Nero responded, "Return, and tell him he must resolve to die." When this message was delivered to Seneca, Seneca commented to the people in his company that this was really of no surprise. Was the cruelty of Nero unknown to any of us? He murdered his mother. He destroyed his brother. And after those deeds of horror, what remains to fill the measure of his guilt but the death of his guardian and tutor? Seneca's veins were opened, but the blood flowed so slowly due to old age that they bound his wounds and tried poison instead. When the poison still did not kill him, he was put in a hot bath and suffocated by the vapors. One by one, Nero eliminated his advisors and his friends. No matter who they were, what position of power they held, or which noble family they came from, anyone he felt had been involved in the plot was killed. Subrius Flavius, Suspicious Asper, Fennius Rufus, Vestinius, Lucian the poet, Senecio, Quintanius, Savinius, and many, many others were either put to death or banished. While the city presented a scene of blood and funerals darkened the streets, the altars of the capital smoked with victims slaughtered on the occasion. One had lost a son, another was deprived of his brother, his friend, or his near relation, and yet, stifling every sentiment of the heart, all concurred in offering thanks to the gods. They adorned the prince's house with laurels. They fell at the tyrant's feet. They clasped his knees and printed kisses on his hand. Nero called the Senate into assembly to deliver a speech on the late transactions, and he issued a proclamation with a statement of the evidence against the conspirators and their own confessions. Nero was received in the Senate with the basest of flattery. And the men who had the greatest reason to be overwhelmed with grief were the most forward to offer flattery to the emperor.
And if you read the life, the true life of the Emperor Nero, you have an exact track of the personality of President Obama. You also have, unfortunately, a track of the U.S. citizens who will not take seriously the need to throw this guy out of government on the grounds of clinical insanity under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. He could be also thrown out for a number of other reasons. Reasons of tantamount to treason as political crimes against the United States. But the real basis for the treatment, the just treatment of this guy as a mental case, is as a mental case. He's obviously of the clinical type of the Emperor Nero, and he's already entered into the phase of demonstrating in practice, as in the case of Libya and other cases, and American citizens murdered by him in violation of all law, that those lives depend upon getting him out of office now before he can accelerate his kill ratio into the internal United States. What he's doing to U.S. citizens to murder them abroad, in various countries as in near Asia, so forth, what he's doing there is a precursor of what he will do here unless stopped. I don't care who you are or where you are. Your life is not safe while this guy is president.